Hi, my name's Serene. For years, I was told to stay quiet, to be the mature one, the grounded one. They praised me for disappearing. Marcella, my stepmother, said I made the house messy just by existing. My father said, don't make things harder than they are. Then, after everything, after my birthday passed like a ghost, after she burned the last letter my mom ever wrote me, they tried to send me away, like I was the problem. But what happens when the girl they tried to erase starts recording everything? And what if the only person who could end Marcella's performance was her own daughter? Would you believe me if I said the truth was louder than her silence? The delicate clatter of silverware echoed softly through the hallways of the house. Not loud, never loud, but just enough to serve as a quiet reminder. I wasn't welcome, not tonight, maybe not ever. I stood still at the entrance to the dining room, the dim hallway light behind me casting a faint shadow across the floor. The rest of me remained swallowed in darkness, like I belonged there. Half a ghost, half invisible. I watched them without breathing. 3 chairs had been pulled out neatly. 3 plates sat in front of them, steaming gently. A glass of water beside each, tiny droplets sliding down the outside like they'd just been poured. 3. Not 4. Marcella moved with deliberate grace, fussing over the already perfect table like she was hosting some upscale fundraiser instead of dinner with family. She aligned the silverware, straightened a napkin that didn't need straightening. She never looked up when she spoke. You already grabbed a snack earlier, didn't you? I blinked. The last thing I ate was a granola bar around noon, and now it was pushing 7. But I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure if it was a question or just another way of saying I wasn't expected. My presence was incidental. Dad sat at the end of the table, glasses slipping down his nose, eyes glued to his phone, probably reading the news again. He didn't glance at the plates or the number of chairs. If he noticed, he chose not to say anything. That had become his quiet talent over the years, ignoring anything too messy to address. Discomfort was just another tab he could close. Viora, already seated, began scooping mashed potatoes onto her plate, her perfectly curled blonde hair bouncing with each movement. Her nails gleamed, freshly painted in a soft pastel shade. She wore a new ivory sweater I hadn't seen before, probably one of Marcella's just because gifts. She looked like a magazine ad. Marcella finally looked at me, locking eyes across the room. Her smile was small, serene, almost gentle, but her words were something else. Some seats, she said, her voice smooth as polished marble, are earned. Then she sat, slow and poised, as if her sentence hadn't just cracked something open in the room. I turned and walked away before the sound of dinner really began, before forks hit plates, before the fake small talk started. I wasn't hungry anymore, or maybe I just couldn't pretend to be. Upstairs, I laid on my bed. The tablet was face down beside me, my phone powered off. The silence in my room felt thick, like fog, like molasses. It stretched and pulled at the minutes, making time feel endless. I listened. Laughter filtered up from below, the scrape of forks, the muted clinks of glasses, the rise and fall of voices pretending everything was okay. Marcella's exaggerated laugh rang out now and then, her "I'm so delightful" laugh, her "look how gracious I am" laugh. Later that night, when the sounds had died down and the dishwasher hummed softly, I crept down for water. The kitchen was clean. Too clean. The table had been cleared, no extra plate added, no note left saying, "Saved you some," no covered dish with foil and my name scribbled on top. Just nothing. Only the empty chair. 3 days later, it was Viora's birthday. I woke up to the smell of cinnamon rolls, frosting, and brewing coffee. That festive kind of morning scent. I looked out the window to see cars I didn't recognize parked outside. Pink and gold balloons were tied to the porch rail, swaying gently in the breeze. Marcella stood in the driveway, guiding a woman carrying a 3-tier white cake toward the front door like she was handling something sacred. No one had said a word about a party. Not Marcella, not Dad, not even Viora. I stayed upstairs the entire day. The doorbell rang so many times I lost count. At least 8, maybe more. Music began around 2 p.m., soft at first, then louder. I peeked once, silently, through the railing at the top of the stairs. Marcella was standing by the entryway, arms around a woman in yoga pants and designer heels. "So glad you could make it," she said with a wide smile. "Viora is just everything." "She really is your pride and joy," the woman responded. Marcella beamed. "Of course. She's my legacy." I ducked back before anyone saw me. 3 days earlier, on my birthday, there had been no frosting, no balloons, no greetings, no one said a single word, not even a passing mention. Marcella hadn't even glanced in my direction. I wrapped a book I already owned, in leftover Christmas paper I'd found in a drawer, and sat on the edge of my bed that evening. I unwrapped it slowly, pretending for 5 minutes that it was a surprise, pretending for 10 more that it didn't matter. Now, as the music pulsed below and laughter filled every room but mine, I lay there again. But this time, it wasn't sadness curling inside me. It was something colder, sharper. Later that night, long after the last guest had left and the balloons had started to sag, I came downstairs again. The scent of frosting still lingered faintly in the air. The trash can was open just enough to reveal the remnants of the cake, thick crumbs and a sliver of icing that read, "Happy Birthday, Viora," in glittery gold cursive. One balloon, half deflated, rested quietly in the corner. I sat at the bottom of the stairs, not crying, not angry, just still. I felt like an old painting hung in the wrong hallway, something forgotten but too inconvenient to throw away, something you pass by without ever really seeing, an artifact in a house full of living people. That night, I pulled out a notebook and began writing, not out of rage, not even pain, because someday, when they say I made it all up, when they claim I twisted things, I'll have every moment written down. And I'll know I didn't imagine it. I didn't steal the bracelet, but that night, I stole back something else, my resolve. The next morning felt colder than usual, even though the thermostat hadn't changed. There was a draft in the hallway, or maybe just in my bones. I walked past the kitchen where Marcella was already seated, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. She glanced at me briefly, then looked away. Her silence didn't feel neutral, it felt loaded. I was halfway through brushing my teeth when she barged into my room. No knock, just a storm in the shape of a woman carrying an empty velvet jewelry box. "Where is it?" she demanded, waving the box like it held a smoking gun. I didn't have time to answer before she continued. "Viora's bracelet. Her grandmother gave it to her. You were in her room yesterday, weren't you?" I stared at her, toothbrush still in hand. "I was putting away laundry." "Uh-huh," she said, folding her arms. "And that just so happens to be the last time anyone saw it." There it was, no preface, no attempt at kindness, just an accusation, sharp and instant. I rinsed my mouth, still silent. I had learned that anything I said too quickly would be turned into evidence. "Don't you have anything to say for yourself?" she pressed. "I didn't take anything," I said, finally. Quiet, but firm. She shook her head. "That's not going to cut it this time." I followed her downstairs, not because she told me to, but because I knew where this was headed, and I wasn't about to be accused in secret. If she was going to drag me through the mud, she could at least do it in front of the people she pretended to protect. Gideon was at the kitchen table, typing something into his laptop, glasses on, coffee steaming. Viora sat nearby, sipping orange juice, not looking up. Marcella walked in first, then gestured toward me. "We need to have a conversation." Gideon glanced up. "Now?" "Yes, now." Her voice had that edge to it, the one he never pushed back against. "She stole Viora's bracelet," Marcella said, looking directly at me like I was an object under cross-examination. "The one with the silver charms. You remember it, right?" Gideon sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Is this really?" "It's missing. She was the last one in the room. I'm not jumping to conclusions, Gideon. I'm connecting dots." "I didn't take anything," I said again, calmly. Viora still didn't look up. Marcella turned toward me, tone sharp. "I never thought I'd have to say this, but we raised you better." That word, "we," landed hard, as if she'd had any hand in raising me. I looked at Gideon. He didn't move. He didn't defend me. He didn't even ask a question, just stared at his coffee like it had all the answers. Marcella stepped closer. This house runs on trust. And when someone breaks that trust, there are consequences. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask, what trust? But instead, I stood there, the air around me thick with judgment. I felt like I was outside my own body, watching a girl be accused of something she didn't do by a woman who had never once hugged her. Marcella folded her arms. Say you're sorry. I didn't take it. Say it anyway, she hissed. For the good of this family. That word again. Family. Used like a weapon. I looked at Viora. She finally raised her eyes and met mine. There was something there. Hesitation. Maybe guilt. But she said nothing. She set her juice down without finishing it. I'm sorry, I said. Not to her. Not to Marcella. But to the space between us. Just to make it end. Marcella nodded like she had won something. Thank you, she said. Now go to your room. I walked up the stairs slowly, each step echoing louder than the last. I sat on the edge of my bed, back straight, hands in my lap. Hours passed. That evening, Viora found the bracelet under the couch cushion. She told Marcella quietly in the kitchen. I heard it from the top of the stairs. Marcella didn't come up to tell me. No one did. At dinner, there were again only 3 plates, not 4. Viora glanced at me once but quickly looked away. I waited for something. Anything. But silence filled every gap in the room. That night, I pulled out my tablet. I'd been using it mostly for school, but now, I had a new use for it. I opened the camera. Hit record. Set it on my desk and just talked. I was accused today, I began. No one asked for proof. No one even asked if I was okay. They just looked at me and decided I was guilty. I paused. Maybe they won't believe me, but someday someone will. So I'm recording this, for whoever needs to see the truth. I saved the video, backed it up twice. Then I opened a new folder. For later. The next morning, I added another clip. Nothing dramatic. Just a 5-second video of Marcella reminding Viora that she was the only girl in this house who mattered. I didn't say a word. I just pressed record. The fire took my letter, but it sparked something else I didn't expect. Clarity. That clarity didn't show up all at once. It arrived quietly, like frost on the windows in the early morning. At first, it was just a change in how I looked at things, how long I lingered at a doorway, how sharply I noticed silence that used to feel harmless. The next night, I sat at my desk and took out a clean sheet of paper. The first had gone up in smoke, but I still had something to say. I wrote carefully, like every word mattered because it did. Dad, I started, I'm not trying to stir trouble. I just don't think Marcella likes me. I know that might sound dramatic, but I don't feel safe saying this out loud. I went on, choosing each sentence with care. How she spoke to me, how I wasn't at the table anymore, how my birthday passed like a Tuesday. I didn't beg. I didn't accuse. I just told the truth as plainly as I could. I folded the letter 3 times, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it between the files in his leather briefcase when he left it open near the front door. He was scheduled to leave for a weekend conference in Richmond. I figured by the time he read it, he'd be away from her long enough to see it for what it was. That night, I went to sleep feeling something almost like relief. It didn't last 24 hours. The next evening, I came down to the kitchen for water. The house was quiet. Marcella stood at the stove stirring something that smelled like beef and garlic. She didn't look up as I entered, but her voice cut through the quiet like glass. You should really be careful what you write, Serene. I froze. She reached into the drawer beside her, pulled out a familiar piece of paper, now crumpled, creased. My letter, my handwriting, my words. I'm surprised, she continued, at how much you think you understand, and how little you actually do. I stood there, my throat dry. Did you read my— I read everything in this house, she interrupted, especially things left in places they shouldn't be. She turned back to the stove as if it were just another Tuesday. I waited. Part of me expected her to lecture me, to threaten me, but instead, she reached over to the sink, grabbed the lighter from the counter, and, without ceremony, lit the edge of the letter. It caught instantly, curling into black. She dropped it into the sink, where it smoked, then vanished. "Next time," she said, "you might want to try a diary with a lock." I went back upstairs, shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From the bitter confirmation that even the smallest effort to be heard was treated like rebellion. Days passed, but they didn't pass quietly. Tension in the house hummed beneath everything, every clink of a fork, every closed door. Gideon left for Richmond without ever mentioning the letter. I had my answer. Then came the text. I was doing homework on the living room floor when my phone buzzed. The message came from Dad's contact. "Marcella says you're struggling with boundaries. We'll talk when I'm back. Dad." I read it 3 times. Something about the tone. Wasn't him. Struggling with boundaries? That wasn't how he talked. And he never signed texts with Dad. My stomach knotted. I went upstairs, pulled out my old tablet, and opened the contact settings on my phone. I scrolled through the messages, comparing timestamps. The contact info had been modified, subtly, but enough. The number the message came from wasn't his. Marcella had texted me, from her phone, masquerading as him. I sat on my bed, heart pounding. She had read my letter, burned it, and now planted fake words in my head as if they came from the one person I was still holding out hope for. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the porch steps wrapped in my hoodie, watching the steam from my breath mix with the crisp January air. Above me, the stars blinked like they were trying to send a message. Maybe they were. I sat there for over an hour. Then I went inside, turned on the hallway light, and walked straight to my room. I pulled the tablet off my bookshelf. For the first time, I opened the camera, not for homework or silly videos, but with intent. I hit record. "My name is Serene. I live in Ashburn, Virginia. I'm 14. This is what it looks like when you're gaslit in your own home." I paused. Tonight, I got a message from someone pretending to be my dad. It wasn't him. I checked. I inhaled, steady. Not shaky, not scared. She burned my letter, and now she's burning every path I have to speak up. But I'm not done talking. I clicked save. That was the beginning of something. I didn't know what yet, but it felt like the smallest match in a very dark room. Over the next few days, I started recording things, not hours of footage, just small moments, a muttered insult, a slammed door. Marcella telling someone on the phone, "I only have one daughter, thank God." I didn't respond. I just captured it. Viora noticed once. I saw her eyes flicker toward the tablet angled near my desk lamp. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. One afternoon, I walked past the hallway mirror and caught my reflection. I looked the same, but something had shifted behind my eyes. I wasn't hoping someone would save me anymore. I was preparing to save myself. That email didn't just delete my name, it confirmed hers as the enemy. It happened on a Wednesday, a few days after I recorded the clip about the fake text. The week had started quiet, with Marcella keeping a calculated calm. It was almost worse than the shouting, a silence sharp enough to cut through. That morning, I checked my school email during second period. Most messages were the usual: schedule updates, lunch menus, a reminder to submit a science project. But one subject line stood out: scholarship status notification. I tapped it. The email was brief, clinical. "Dear Serene, we regret to inform you that the Ashburn Gifted Scholars Initiative has been reassigned to another candidate. Thank you for your participation and continued academic excellence." My chest went still. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, rereading each line like I'd missed something. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was a mistake. I had the highest scores. My application had been reviewed and approved 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Eliora had even congratulated me in person, said she'd nominated me herself. At lunch, I found her near the counselor's office, sipping coffee from a ceramic mug that read, "Be kind anyway." She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Hey, Serene, everything okay?" I handed her my phone without speaking. She read the email, brows drawing together. "Wait, what? That can't be right. Your file was flagged as one of the top 2 in the entire district." She immediately turned to her computer and pulled up my application. I watched as her expression shifted from confusion to something heavier. "There's a note here," she said. "From home." "From who?" I asked, though I already had a guess. She scanned the file. "A call log from Marcella Edwards. It says you've had recent behavioral issues and that she's concerned the added pressure of a scholarship might impact your emotional stability." I blinked, but my face didn't change. I had stopped reacting the way people expected a long time ago. "There's no documentation," she continued. "No write-ups, no incidents on file. It's just a note, verbal communication marked as guardian concern. That's irregular." I stared at the floor, my jaw tight. "So that's it? They took her word and pulled the scholarship?" Eleora looked pained. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. This isn't standard protocol. I'll ask for a review." "No," I said, voice calm but cold. "It's fine." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "I just needed to know how it happened." "Now I do." I left her office without another word. I didn't go to my next class. I walked the perimeter of the school twice, then took the long route home, phone gripped so tight my knuckles went pale. When I got back, the house was quiet. Marcella was at the dining table, laptop open, mug beside her, always presenting as the productive homemaker. I held up my phone, the email still open. "They took back the scholarship." She looked up, calm as ever. "Oh, that's unfortunate." I waited, watching her eyes. No flicker, no guilt. "You did it," I said. She reached for her tea and took a sip. "I'm just protecting your image, sweetheart," she said casually. "Not everyone handles pressure well." I almost laughed. "So now I'm unstable?" "You're young, sensitive. You overthink things. I'm trying to help you find balance." "By pulling my name from something I earned?" She shrugged. "You'll have other chances. This one wasn't a good fit." "I know what's best." I stepped closer, the space between us small but heavy. "You lied to them," she smiled, almost maternally. "I guided them." At that moment, Viora walked in from the backyard, earbuds slung around her neck. She stopped when she saw us, sensing tension. Her eyes flicked to me, then to Marcella. I wanted to scream, to shout at her to speak up, to say something, anything, but she didn't. She stood there, unsure, then turned and walked to the kitchen. Marcella gave me one last glance, the kind people give pets when they've grown tired of them. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I went to my room, shut the door, and sat on the bed. Not crying, not pacing, just still. Then I opened my tablet. I turned on the front camera, stared into the lens, and hit record. "My name is Serene," I said slowly, "and I earned a scholarship I'll never receive because my stepmother made a phone call." I held up my phone to the camera, the email visible. "This is what happened when I did something good. This is who took it away." I saved the video and uploaded it to a private drive, password protected, hidden. That night, I whispered to myself as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. "I'm done apologizing for being visible." She didn't break me that night, but she did break the silence. A week later, Marcella hosted one of her famous girls' dinner nights, which meant the house smelled like lemon chicken and Pinterest-worthy desserts, and the furniture had been rearranged just enough to look staged but casual. The kind of dinner where she made sure the wine bottles were turned just right for the camera and the napkins folded like they belonged on magazine covers. It was also the kind of night where I was supposed to sit quietly, smile when spoken to, and not overshare. I was used to being invisible, but this time was different. This time, she invited me to sit at the table. Marcella had positioned herself at the head of the table. I took my usual spot, the one near the end, not quite next to anyone, not quite across from anyone. Just there. Present, but peripheral. She began her toast as predictably as ever. "To strong women, raising strong daughters." Her glass clinked gently. "And to Viora," she added, turning her body toward her daughter, who has just completed her last essay for early college applications. The women around the table clapped. Someone said, "That's amazing, hun." Marcella beamed. "She's our shining star." Then her eyes shifted toward me, and the pitch of her voice softened like she was about to compliment the family dog. "And Serene," she added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "is our quiet one. So grounded. That kind of strength. Silent strength. It's just as powerful." The room nodded in agreement, as if I had been given a trophy. I gave a tight smile, but my chest burned. Grounded. Quiet. A strength so quiet, it might as well be absence. I sat through the rest of the dinner, chewing slowly, feeling the weight of their praise like a leash. They didn't know they were applauding a version of me that wasn't real, one Marcella had curated. Later that night, while picking up dishes from the dining table, I passed by Viora's backpack, left carelessly in the hallway. A few papers had slipped out, and one caught my eye, not because of the heading, but because it had my name on it. I picked it up. "Thank you for your interest in our pre-college creative writing program. We regret to inform you." I froze. The letter was addressed to me, but I had never applied to that program. I would have remembered my name, my email, my address, but the formatting was wrong. The writing sample attached was not mine. I stood there for a full minute, heart pounding. It didn't take a genius to piece it together. Marcella had submitted a fake application on my behalf, with a weak sample, just enough to make sure I didn't get in. I carried the letter to my room and compared it with the application materials I had saved on my tablet. It was so obvious. Too obvious. Almost like she hadn't even tried to hide it. Or maybe she didn't think I was paying attention. The next morning, after everyone had left for school or errands, I walked into Viora's room. She was painting her nails on the floor, music playing through her earbuds. I sat on the edge of her bed and waited for her to notice me. When she did, she pulled out one earbud. "What?" I held up the letter. Her face drained just a little. "Why does your mom need me to fail for you to shine?" I asked, my voice calm, but pointed. "I didn't ask her to do anything," she muttered. "But you didn't stop her either." "She's just trying to help," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Help who?" Viora didn't answer. "I'm not your competition, Viora," I continued. "I never was. You could have said something. You still can." She looked up, and for the first time, I saw it. Not defiance, not superiority, just shame. "You think I like this?" she snapped. "Being watched all the time? Having to be perfect all the time?" I blinked. That wasn't the answer I expected. "She says I'm her legacy," she said softly, almost to herself. "But I don't even know who I am half the time." There was a pause, heavy and unfamiliar between us. Then she put her earbuds back in and turned away. I didn't follow her. Back in my room, I stared at the letter again. I'd always known Marcella was calculated, but now I knew she wasn't just trying to erase me. She was building a narrative, one where I never existed as more than a muted background character. I opened my journal and wrote, "This is the line. The next time she touches my life, I'll touch back. Not violently, not cruelly, just truthfully." That evening, I didn't film anything. I didn't post. I didn't shout. I sat with myself. I breathed. I let the clarity of what I now knew sink into my bones. She didn't break me that night, but she did break the silence. They wanted me gone. But now, they'll wish I had stayed silent. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when the message came in. I had just stepped off the school bus, the wind biting through my jacket, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Dad. But the moment I read the text, I knew something was off. "We think it's best if you spend some time away. Marcella found a boarding program that will help you focus." There was no hi, no love you, no use of my name, just a verdict typed out like a weather alert. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the screen as kids pushed past me. I read it again, then a third time. My hands trembled, not from the cold. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence from me was already what they expected. Inside the house, everything was normal. Marcella was in the kitchen chopping vegetables like she hadn't just tried to ship me out of the family. Gideon wasn't home yet. Viora was in her room, probably pretending none of it involved her. I walked upstairs, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of my bed. The walls of my room looked smaller that day. Not physically, but emotionally, like the space itself had conspired to shrink around me. That night, I searched for something I hadn't touched in over a year. I dug through the bottom drawer of my bookshelf, behind some old notebooks, until I found the hardcover novel my mom had given me on my 10th birthday. I hadn't opened it since she passed. I used to sleep with it beside me like it was armor. I flipped through the pages slowly. The spine still crackled, the paper still smelled faintly of her perfume. And there it was, tucked between chapter 11 and 12. A letter. Her handwriting. Serene, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there the way I wish I could be. But you're strong, baby. You've always been. And whatever storm comes, remember who you are. They don't get to rewrite that. I read it 3 times before folding it back into the book and tucking it under my pillow. My heartbeat finally slowed. The next morning, I left early for school. When I came back in the afternoon, the book was gone. I tore apart my room, every shelf, every drawer, even under the bed. Nothing. I ran downstairs. Marcella was folding laundry on the couch, her tone calm as ever. Looking for something? I didn't answer. She didn't wait. If you're asking about the book, it's in the trash, along with the letter. My throat went dry. You had no right. I have every right, she said, folding a towel. That letter was keeping you tied to a grief you refuse to let go. You need to move forward. That's what this boarding school is for. It wasn't yours, I said, voice shaking. None of this is. Marcella stood, arms crossed. You don't get to decide what's best for you, Serene. That's not how this works. You mean because I'm not your daughter? Her jaw tightened. Don't twist my words. I'm not twisting anything, I said. You just don't like it when someone sees behind the curtain. At that moment, the front door opened. Gideon walked in, briefcase in one hand, tie half loosened. He looked tired, older than last week. Marcella turned to him like nothing had happened. We were just talking about the program I mentioned. I turned to him, eyes burning. Is it true? You're sending me away? He paused. His eyes flicked between us. I think it might be good for you, he said slowly. A fresh environment. A chance to reset. To reset what? I snapped. The version of me that doesn't make her uncomfortable? Serene, he said, raising a hand. Let's not do this right now. Of course. Let's not do this. Let's not do anything that might reveal the truth. I stared at him for a moment. The silence between us didn't feel like distance. It felt like a choice. I walked past both of them, up the stairs, and into my room. That evening, I sat in the backyard, hoodie pulled up, knees drawn to my chest. The sky had turned purple, the first stars blinking into view. My breath came out in puffs of steam. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and propped it against the back porch light. I hit record. My name is Serene. I live in Ashburn, Virginia. I'm 14 years old, and my family is trying to send me away. I paused. My stepmother threw out the last letter my mother ever wrote me. She said grief makes me weak. But it's not grief that weakens me. It's silence. I stared into the lens. If this is exile, I choose rebellion. I stopped the recording and uploaded it to my locked folder. Then I opened my email and attached the video to a message for Ms. Eliora. Subject line, in case anything happens. I didn't wait for courage. I hit send. The house she ruled with silence just became a stage where her mask cracked, and we were all watching. I didn't plan for it to happen the way it did. I only meant to record a pattern, keep a trail, build a slow, steady case. But something about that morning felt off. It was early March, the wind outside still pretending winter hadn't given up. The sun hadn't fully broken through the clouds, and inside the house, it was too quiet for comfort. That kind of quiet where you know it's the breath before a scream. Marcella was in the kitchen again, pacing and muttering about kids who don't respect boundaries. I kept my distance. I knew better than to offer a reply. I picked up my book from the living room table where I had left it the night before, spine up, pages splayed open exactly where I'd stopped. You left this here again, she said sharply, her tone like she'd just found a roach in the fridge. This is not your personal library. It was one book, I said, keeping my voice even. Her heels clicked against the tile as she walked toward me. And that's how it starts. First a book, then a mess, then a reason for people to say I don't run a clean home. She grabbed the novel and slapped it off the table. It landed near my feet with a loud thud, pages bent. You are not going to sabotage my space with your chaos. What she didn't know, what she'd never even considered, is that just down the hallway, tucked on a shelf, my tablet was open and recording. Not just that, it was streaming. I had enabled the setting the night before, deciding I would run a test, see if the footage could sync live to a cloud service I had set up through Miss Eliora's guidance. I didn't expect to catch anything, not like this, but there it was, her words, her voice, her hand slapping the book, and every second of it was live. At that moment, I didn't know who was watching, I just knew someone was. I bent down and picked up the book, heart racing but face blank. Marcella stared at me. Pick up after yourself, Serene. One day, when you're not coddled anymore, you'll understand what it takes to keep order. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Halfway across town, in the school cafeteria, Viora sat across from a girl who was halfway through biting into a sandwich. The girl stopped chewing and shoved her phone across the table. Isn't that your house? Viora blinked, confused, then took the phone and stared. The live stream played without filters or context. Her mother, my voice, the thud of the book hitting the floor, the tone that even I had grown numb to. The cafeteria buzzed with low conversation. 2 more phones pulled up the video. Someone whispered, "Is that real?" Viora stood up, mouth dry. She didn't say anything. She just walked out of the room. Left her tray, her books, everything. She didn't go home that night. I found out the next morning from the guidance counselor's office, where I'd been called in unexpectedly. Mrs. Eliora sat behind her desk, unusually quiet. She looked at me like someone trying to process something massive, but not wanting to crush it. I saw the stream, she finally said. I waited. You've been documenting for weeks, haven't you? I nodded. Do you know who shared it? No, I said honestly. It wasn't supposed to go public. She leaned forward. Someone clipped the feed and sent it to 3 school staff members and the PTA. My breath caught. It was anonymous, she said. But I don't think it matters anymore. What matters is it's out, and people saw it. That weekend, the school hosted an annual student showcase. Parents, teachers, administrators, all packed into the auditorium. Every year, there was a short video recap of student projects. Viora was on the committee that helped edit it. I sat 3 rows back, not expecting anything except another reminder that I was never the daughter on display. But as the video began, the tone shifted. Clips of students building science projects faded to black, replaced by a caption, "What does home mean to you?" Then came the footage, uncut, unflinching. Marcella's voice, my silence, the slap of the book, her words, "You are not going to sabotage my space with your chaos." Gasps echoed around the room. The screen went black again. Silence. Then a chair scraped. Viora stood. She stepped onto the stage without waiting for permission, walked to the mic, and looked out at a room full of eyes she had grown up trying to impress. "That's not a mother," she said, her voice clear. "That's a performance piece gone wrong." No applause followed. Just a murmur, a low tide of discomfort that rippled through every row. Marcella was there, of course, sitting straight, smiling too tightly, eyes darting around like she was trying to find an exit that wasn't physical. Gideon sat beside her, frozen. Viora turned to face them, just for a moment. Then she walked off the stage, past every row, past me. She didn't even glance down, just kept walking. But for the first time, I felt like she had taken my side. No one stood to defend Marcella. Not that day, not after that. The house she ruled with silence had become a public stage, and the curtain had been ripped open. She wanted a legacy. Instead, she got a lesson carved into silence and shame. The Ashburn Community Center was dressed in pastel banners and folding chairs that looked like they'd been borrowed from a local church basement. The award ceremony for Community Mother of the Year was one of those small-town events where people smiled too wide and clapped too early, desperate to convince themselves they belonged to something wholesome. Marcella arrived early, of course. She wore ivory, not white. White is too wedding, she had said days before. Ivory is mature, elegant. She paired it with pearls that gleamed just enough under the stage lights and a smile that was practiced in a bathroom mirror. Viora walked beside her, lips pressed into a polite line. No emotion, just presence. Gideon trailed behind, shoulders tighter than I'd ever seen. He wasn't holding Marcella's hand. He wasn't even walking next to her. He was just there, like a man who had finally started to question whether silence had cost him too much. I sat near the back of the room, not on the family row, not on stage, just another seat in the crowd. The woman hosting the event was all smiles and fake cheer. She ran through a long list of community highlights before finally introducing Marcella. "And now," she said, voice sweet as syrup, "please welcome our Community Mother of the Year, Mrs. Marcella Edwards." Applause followed, polite, brief. Marcella stepped onto the stage like it had been built just for her. She approached the microphone, shoulders straight, teeth gleaming. But before she could speak, the screen behind her flickered. There was no announcement, no build-up, just sudden darkness. Then, video. It began with a shot from inside our living room. The grainy footage was unmistakable. Marcella's voice echoed through the speakers. "You are not going to sabotage my space with your chaos." Gasps broke the room's silence. Another clip. Her throwing away the book my mother gave me. Then one more. Her smiling as she said, "Grief makes you weak. We move forward. That's what this family needs." The video wasn't edited for drama. No narration, no music, just raw moments. Her words, her actions, and then, just for a moment, a still shot of me, seated alone at the dinner table. No commentary, just truth. The screen faded to black. No applause followed. Marcella stood frozen, her fingers clenched at the podium. She opened her mouth, then closed it. From the side of the stage, Viora stepped forward. She didn't take the mic. She just spoke, her voice carrying anyway. "I used to think my mother was someone to admire," she began, calm and steady. "I now know she taught me how to lie, to protect herself." The room erupted, not in applause, but in murmurs. Shock, disgust, confusion. Marcella turned toward her daughter, lips parted. "Viora, not here." But it was already done. Viora walked off stage without another word. Gideon stood, slowly. He didn't say anything either, just followed Viora. Marcella remained, now truly alone. The host awkwardly returned to the stage, clearly shaken. Thank you, Marcella, and thank you all for being here." No one clapped. After the ceremony, people began trickling out, some faster than others. I lingered in the lobby, not hiding, just waiting. A woman from the PTA came up to me. She didn't say much, just placed a hand on my arm and whispered, "We didn't know. We believe you now." Another parent nodded in passing, avoiding eye contact. A teacher who'd once called me quiet and hard to read gave me a soft smile. I didn't return it. Outside the building, near the side entrance, Marcella stood near her car, clutching a certificate. It wasn't framed anymore, just a single sheet of heavy paper. Viora approached her slowly. I stayed at a distance, watching. They didn't speak, not a word. Then, without drama, Viora ripped the certificate in half. She handed one piece to her mother and let the other fall to the pavement. Marcella didn't pick it up. She didn't look at me. She got in the car and shut the door. The rest of us watched as the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. She wanted a legacy. Instead, she got a lesson carved into silence and shame. The Ashburn Community Center emptied slowly, the way a theater does after a tragedy too weighty for applause. People drifted out in silence. No one lingered by the snack table or exchanged stiff goodbyes. They just slipped away, like air from a balloon no one realized was deflating. Marcella had vanished first. True to form, she didn't wait around for hugs or handshakes. She simply left. No speech, no backward glance. Her absence, like the carefully staged world she once ruled, collapsed without ceremony. No crash, just silence. Back at the house, everything felt altered in small but undeniable ways. It wasn't peace, not quite, but it was something gentler than what had existed before. The tension that used to stretch through the walls like a tight wire had slackened. The space felt less curated, less brittle. Marcella's signature touches had evaporated, her neatly stacked ceramic dishes gone from the china cabinet, the scent of her overpriced vanilla sugar candles replaced by the neutral smell of old wood and laundry detergent. Even the baby grand piano in the living room, once strictly off limits unless being polished, sat open now, the keys bare and waiting. Someone might actually play it. Gideon still lived in the house, but he moved like someone who had forgotten how to walk with purpose. He spoke less, and when he did, his sentences often drifted off halfway through, trailing into silence like fog over water. He wasn't mean, just hollowed out. As if he had spent so long taking orders, he didn't know how to choose his own thoughts anymore. The house wasn't healed, but it had stopped bleeding. One afternoon, while heading upstairs with a laundry basket on my hip, I passed the hallway where the family wall used to be. For years, it had displayed a parade of perfectly aligned photographs, staged smiles at birthday parties, coordinated outfits at Christmas, Marcella and Viora always front and center. I was there too, sometimes. An elbow here, a blurry shadow in the background, a foot cut off at the frame's edge. But now, something new hung on the wall. A single frame. Plain oak, not silver or gilded. Inside it was a photo of me, Viora, and Gideon sitting on the front porch. It must have been taken just the weekend before. I didn't remember it being snapped. We weren't looking at the camera. No one was posing, but I was laughing, full, unguarded, mouth open laughing, the kind you don't fake. We were barefoot, the porch dusty, sunlight cutting sharp angles through the slats. There were no matching sweaters, no filters, just us. I stood there longer than I meant to, eyes fixed on the image. There was a pull in my chest, a kind of internal shifting I hadn't expected. I was here all along, I whispered, mostly to myself. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I went to the kitchen to make tea. Out of habit, I opened the junk drawer, where Marcella used to stash her emergency birthday candles, expired coupons, and batteries that never worked. That's when I found it. An envelope, yellowed and worn, shoved beneath a stack of ancient takeout menus. I recognized it the instant I touched it. My breath caught in my throat. It was the photograph Marcella had torn up months ago. The one of me and Mom. The one I thought she'd destroyed in a fit of spite. It was still torn, yes, but every piece was there. Jagged edges, fold lines, crumples. It hadn't been thrown out, just hidden. I laid each torn section out on the table and slowly began piecing it back together with a roll of clear tape. My hands were steady, but something inside me trembled. When I finished, I stared at it for a long time. The photo was no longer perfect. The tape lines cut through our faces, slicing through smiles and skin and sunlight. But it was whole again, and that meant something. I didn't hang it up, didn't slide it into a new frame. Instead, I tucked it between two blank pages in my journal, pressed flat, protected. Some things aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be carried, stitched back together, not because they're flawless, but because they matter, because they survived what tried to tear them apart. The next morning was strangely warm for early March, the kind of day where the frost hesitated just long enough for grass to reappear. Viora sat on the front steps, her knees tucked tight to her chest, oversized sweatshirt sleeves covering her hands. She stared out across the lawn like she was watching something no one else could see. I joined her, handing her a hot mug of tea. She took it and looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. "I'm not ready to call her Mom again," she said quietly. "Maybe never." I nodded. "You don't have to." She sipped her tea. Her hands trembled just a little. "I still feel guilty," she murmured, "for not saying something sooner, for just letting it all happen." You don't owe her forgiveness, I said gently, but maybe we owe ourselves peace. She didn't respond right away, just sat there beside me, shoulder to shoulder, eyes tracing the birds in the yard. A blue jay landed near the edge of the grass, bold, noisy, unapologetic. It hopped a few times, then shot off into the sky with a sharp cry. Life was still happening, messy, loud, real. Later that day, when the house was quiet again, Gideon upstairs napping, Viora laughing faintly in her room during a phone call, I sat down at my desk. A blank page waited in front of me, but I wasn't writing a journal entry, not a log, not another invisible record of things no one else would believe. I was writing a letter. Not to Marcella, not to Gideon, not even to my mother. To me. My hand moved slowly, deliberately. Serene, they never saw you. But that doesn't mean you weren't real. You held your ground. You told the truth. You didn't disappear. I sat back, letting the ink dry, the silence around me soft. Then I added one last line. I was never invisible. I was just waiting to be seen by the right version of me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. Sometimes, the loudest act of courage is simply refusing to stay silent. Serene didn't fight back with fury, she fought back with truth. And when truth is witnessed, it can't be unseen. How many families are built on performance, while the real pain hides behind picture frames? If this story moved you or reminded you of something you've lived through, drop a comment. We read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters. Hi, my name's Callista. At my sister's birthday party, her big, glamorous, over-decorated event, she called me a useless servant. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Loud enough for the guests to laugh, and loud enough for me to finally hear it for what it really was. And that wasn't even the worst part. The truth? She'd already forged my signature, taken out a mortgage in my name, and claimed the house I'd paid for as her own. But why did I let it go on so long? Why didn't I speak up sooner? I guess when a family spends years treating you like furniture, you start believing you belong in the background. Until one day, you don't. What finally made me stop accepting it? And what did I do when I found out just how far she'd gone? You'll want to hear this. I arrived 2 hours early, just like I always did. The sun hadn't even begun to drop behind the tall pines that lined Marlene's backyard. I had a tray of lemon tarts in one hand, extra napkins in the other, and the same invisible badge I always wore when my family gathered: unpaid staff. Marlene didn't greet me at the door. She never did. She was in the middle of getting her hair curled by someone named Dahlia, who had over 200,000 followers on Instagram and called everyone babe. Her stylist was adjusting the drape of her champagne silk dress, and a photographer hovered nearby, capturing candid prep shots for the birthday post that would undoubtedly be scheduled down to the second. I slipped in through the side gate, went around to the back patio, and started unpacking platters onto the folding table I'd set up last night. Nobody noticed. Not even my mother, who was sipping her iced tea and listing Marlene's accomplishments to a neighbor from her church. She just got featured in that Charlotte Lifestyle magazine. Front page, no less, Mom said, voice bright and proud. And she's up for a regional branding award next month. I bent down to adjust the tablecloth. A familiar heat crawled up my neck. I'd heard that tone before, when Marlene was valedictorian, when she bought her first car, when she booked her first paid collab. Not once had she said, Callista picked out the paint for this patio, or Callista helped fix the water damage in the guest bathroom, or Callista still pays half the taxes on this place because I couldn't qualify on my own. She never had to say it. No one would have listened anyway. As more guests arrived, I kept my head down. I made sure the drinks were cold, the cheese boards replenished, the decorative citronella candles were lit just enough to seem effortless, and when the time came to be introduced to someone new, a tall man with a Rolex and that slightly too white smile, I stepped forward, only to be cut off by Marlene's voice. Oh, that's just my little helper, our full-time family servant, really. I blinked. The man chuckled awkwardly. I forced a smile. Something sour lodged in my throat, but I swallowed it like I always did. She's joking, I muttered under my breath as I excused myself. Later that evening, the music softened and Marlene stood beneath the string lights, holding her rosé like she was about to toast the end of the world. Guests circled around her. Phones came out. Everyone leaned in. I want to thank the incredible people who made this night possible, she said. My glam team, my content manager, my chef for the stunning grazing table, and of course, my stylist, Dahlia. Applause, whistles. Someone shouted, "Queen!" from the back. I stood beside the patio door, holding an empty platter, having just cleared away the untouched lemon tarts I made from scratch. I wasn't mentioned, not even a glance. And yet, I smiled, because that's what I did. One of Marlene's friends, Tiffany maybe, walked past and said, "You're amazing, girl. These servers could learn from you." I wanted to laugh, but it came out like a hiccup. I walked into the kitchen, peeled off my apron, and leaned against the counter. My legs ached, my face burned. On the dessert table, the cake I'd made, a red velvet layered with cream cheese frosting and sugared raspberries, sat untouched. They were cutting into a sheet cake with her face printed on it instead. I didn't even know she'd ordered another. "This isn't new," I murmured, placing the used forks in the sink. "You've always been the one in the shadows, the one who fills glasses, folds napkins, fixes things, and gets forgotten." My phone buzzed. A notification from a work client. I swiped it away. Then I saw it, an old flagged email from a real estate attorney. Subject line, "Deed, Oak Ridge property." I'd never opened it. I hadn't wanted to stir things up back then. A guest walked in, glanced around, and looked at me. "Oh, good. You're the staff, right? Could you bring out more wine?" He smiled like he was being polite. I nodded, like I was being helpful. I didn't go for the wine. I went to the pantry. Inside, behind a stack of extra plates and a half-used citronella candle, I found the envelope. Beige. Faintly crumpled. Labeled in black marker, "Deed, Oak Ridge property." I picked it up slowly, as if touching it too quickly would make it vanish. My hand trembled. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't something I imagined. I whispered, barely able to hear myself over the music from outside. "This isn't her house. It's mine." I slipped the envelope into my purse, tucking it behind my wallet like it was something shameful, like I was hiding a secret I hadn't even told myself. Outside the pantry, the sound of laughter drifted in waves, light and careless. As I stepped back into the crowd, the lights from the patio strung across the trees seemed too bright, too rehearsed. The air felt different, heavier. I was halfway to the dessert table when I saw him. Bryce Langford. I stopped so abruptly, someone behind me bumped into my shoulder. I murmured a quick apology, but my eyes never left him. He was standing near the edge of the yard, chatting with a group of people I didn't recognize. Tall, pressed shirt. The same quiet smile I remembered, except now it had lines around the edges. He'd aged, but not in a way that made him look tired. He looked successful. Before I could process why he was even here, Marlene spotted him. "Oh my God, Bryce! You came!" She squealed, her voice too loud for the space. Heads turned. She weaved through the guests with a practiced glide and wrapped him in a hug that lasted a few seconds too long. Then she turned to the crowd like she was presenting a prize. "Everyone, this is Bryce, my brilliant college buddy, and, well, Callista's ex-fiancé," she added with a coy grin. The sting was immediate, like salt in a paper cut. A few people chuckled, someone gasped. I didn't move, just nodded politely and kept walking toward the drink table. And then, right on cue, she added, "She's still organizing birthday parties, huh?" My spine tightened, but I didn't react. Not visibly. I grabbed a glass of lemonade I didn't want, took a sip, and set it down untouched. I heard Bryce say my name, softly, cautiously, but I walked away. I wasn't ready to see that look in his eyes. The one that said, "I thought you'd be somewhere else by now." Back inside the kitchen, I pulled the envelope from my purse. I unfolded the deed and scanned the text again, even though I already knew what it said. Oak Ridge property, sole ownership, Callista Ray. 3 years ago. 3 years I let Marlene live here, film here, throw parties here, while I paid for termite treatments and window replacements and water bills she never opened. I remembered Dad handing me the papers before he passed. "I want you to have something of your own," he'd said, squeezing my hand. Back then, it felt too big. I wasn't ready to step out of the role they'd carved for me. It was easier to let Marlene play the part of the host, the face, the one everyone saw. I whispered, 3 years, and not once has she thanked me. The sound of my voice startled me. I rarely said anything out loud anymore, unless someone needed me to. I heard the patio door creak. Footsteps. I turned and saw Bryce in the doorway. "Hey," he said, voice gentle. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just nodded and stepped aside so he could come in. He leaned against the counter across from me, not too close. He looked uncomfortable, like someone realizing they might have misunderstood something for a very long time. "Marlene told me you were comfortable staying at home," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable," I repeated. "That's one word for unpaid labor." He gave a dry chuckle, then ran a hand through his hair. "She made it sound like you didn't want more, like you were just content where you were. She also said she was allergic to dairy for 6 years just to get out of cooking for Mom. You believe everything she says?" He looked away, embarrassed. I continued. "I built this party, I gave her this house, and she tells people I'm the maid." His eyes met mine. This time, he didn't look away. "If I'd known," he started. "But you didn't," I cut in, "because you never asked. You just assumed. That's what people like you do. You see someone quiet and think that means they've got nothing to say." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left for him to say. We stood there for a moment, the silence filling every inch of the space between us. He shifted, like he might apologize again, but I turned away and began refolding the deed. I didn't need his pity. I didn't need his guilt. Outside, someone began singing Happy Birthday. The crowd joined in. Marlene's voice carried loudest, harmonizing like it was a performance. I looked out the window at all the people smiling, clapping, recording every second. "Everyone out there thinks I'm lucky to be tolerated," I murmured, "but they're all standing on my foundation." I slid the deed back into my purse, zipped it shut, and straightened up. No more pretending. The singing died down, replaced by the clink of glasses and the buzz of people trying to talk over one another. I stepped out of the kitchen just as someone began ushering the family toward the backyard for a group toast. I followed, not because I wanted to be part of it, but because if I didn't show up, someone would say I was being dramatic. Marlene stood at the center, a glass of something pink in her hand. The string lights caught her perfectly curled hair, and she smiled like she was living inside her own commercial. "To family," she began, raising her glass, "and to knowing your place in it." Some people laughed right away. A few glanced around like they weren't sure if it was meant to be a joke. My mother chuckled. A man I didn't recognize nudged me gently and whispered, "She's always been the helper, huh? Never complains." I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my mouth not to betray me. I slipped away from the crowd, my heels clicking on the wooden floor of the hallway as I passed framed photos. Marlene's graduation, Marlene's bridal shower, Marlene with the mayor at a charity brunch. I opened the guest room door and walked inside. It was quieter here. Dim. The only light came from a small lamp on the dresser where the family memory wall stood like a shrine. I scanned the frames. Same faces, same smiles. And then I saw it. The birthday photo from when Marlene turned 11. I hadn't thought about that day in decades, but the image brought it all back. I'd worn a floral dress Mom pulled from a box in the attic. It didn't fit right. I'd brushed my hair down because Marlene said braids made me look too country. I had helped decorate the porch with balloons that popped before noon. And then, when it was time to take the group photo, Mom had turned to me and said, "This one's just for Marlene's friends, sweetheart. You'll understand." I didn't argue. I just stepped aside. Looking at that picture now, I realized she was right. I did understand. Even back then, I took out my phone and snapped a picture. Not for nostalgia, just as a reminder of what being invisible actually looked like. I left the room and walked to the kitchen. The voices outside were muffled, giving me a moment to breathe. I opened the cabinet beneath the microwave, half expecting to find a mess of old extension cords. Instead, I found my laptop. It hadn't been touched in years. Dust layered the keys, and the charging cable was curled like an afterthought. I plugged it in, more out of muscle memory than hope, and waited for the screen to flicker. When it finally came to life, it opened to a folder labeled Senior Portfolio. My name sat on each draft. The thumbnails showed designs I had poured myself into. Layouts, product mock-ups, branding ideas. One project had been inspired by a textile pattern from my grandmother's old quilts. Another borrowed colors from the wild hydrangeas that lined our street. I hadn't opened this folder since the week I turned down the scholarship to Colorado. Senior year, full ride. A place to go and make something of myself. But then Marlene had shown up, baby in tow, crying in the kitchen, while Mom hovered around her like a nurse in a hospital drama. No job, no husband, just excuses and, how could this happen? Looks passed between them, like I wasn't even in the room. Mom had pulled me aside 2 days later. "You're the calm one," she said. "You'll understand. We need you here." What she meant was, "You're the one we can guilt without pushback." So I gave up the scholarship. I told myself I'd reapply later, after the baby started school, after things settled. But things never settle in this family. They just reshape themselves around the people who scream the loudest. I opened one of the design files. It took a moment to load, but there it was. Clean, sharp, with notes I barely recognized as my own handwriting. The door creaked behind me, but I didn't turn around. Whoever it was, they could wait. I stared at the screen. My screen. And I whispered. It could have been me. But I stayed. I didn't cry. There was no need for tears. Not anymore. I closed the laptop lid and leaned back, hands folded in my lap. A long, steady breath left me like it had been waiting to exhale for years. I stood there, phone in hand, thumb hovering over send. A quiet came over me, not the kind that leaves you alone, but the kind that demands you listen. I didn't send the email, not yet. I closed the screen, slipped the phone into my bag, and walked back toward the patio. One step at a time. My head felt clearer than it had in years, like a fog was finally lifting. By the time I returned, the formal toast was already underway. They'd rearranged the seating into a long table setup, string lights overhead and glassware shimmering like everything was perfectly in place. Because that's what Marlene knew how to do. Make things look good from a distance. Place cards sat neatly on every setting. I scanned the line, walking slowly, not because I was unsure of where to sit, but because I wanted to see. There it was. Third seat from the right, beside my cousin Cheryl, was a name tag that should have read Callista. It didn't. Instead, it said Cheryl M. Mine had been replaced. I paused, fingertips brushing the edge of the card. She hadn't forgotten. She'd chosen not to include me. The servers were seated at the folding table near the fence, eating small plates with one another in the dim evening light. They had a seat. I didn't. I stepped back from the table and moved toward the hedge line, staying just close enough to hear the toast. "To family," Marlene called, lifting her glass. "And to knowing your place in it." A few people chuckled. A few looked confused. My mother raised her glass without hesitation. Someone patted my arm as they walked by and said, "You always know how to make things work. You've got a gift." I nodded, even though I wanted to scream. I stood alone for most of it, watching them clink glasses, kiss cheeks, pass around compliments like they were mints. Even the kids got more acknowledgement than I had. It wasn't until Bryce walked over that anyone noticed I was missing. "You didn't get a seat?" he asked quietly, scanning the table behind me. I gave him a small smile, flat, without warmth. "Not tonight, not most nights." He opened his mouth, as if about to explain something that didn't need explaining, then closed it again. "I didn't know. About the house, about the bills, about you turning down school." I met his eyes, calm. "You didn't ask. You never asked. You just took Marlene's word for it." He looked down. "I thought you were content. I figured you wanted this kind of life." I tilted my head. "You figured wrong, but you're not the only one." He looked like he wanted to apologize again, but I didn't give him the chance. "We all would have made different choices if we'd known better," I said. "Hindsight's easy. Living with the consequences is the real work." That shut him up. I left him standing there and walked inside, my footsteps lighter than they had any right to be. I wasn't carrying guilt anymore. I'd set it down. The kitchen was quieter now. Most of the caterers were outside cleaning up, and the smell of heated trays and melted butter still hung in the air. I found my mother near the sink, inspecting the coffee carafes. She was fussing over the labels like they were going to be reviewed in a magazine spread. I cleared my throat softly. "Why didn't I have a seat?" I asked. She didn't even look at me. "Don't start. Not tonight." "I'm not starting anything," I replied. "I'm asking a question." She sighed, as if the weight of my presence was somehow heavier than the years I'd spent keeping her house intact. "This isn't about you," she snapped. "This is your sister's night. You always find a way to make it about yourself." That was it. "That's rich," I said. "Considering I gave her the house this party's being held in. Considering I've paid the taxes, paid the repairs, and made sure you never missed a prescription." She finally looked up, but not with remorse, just irritation. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just done being silent." She looked away again, waving me off with a flick of her hand. "It's always been Marlene. You were always different. You never needed the attention." I studied her face, trying to find the version of her I'd once run to for comfort, but she wasn't there. Maybe she never had been. "It's never been my day, has it?" I asked. She didn't answer. She turned her back and started rinsing out the coffee pot. I caught my reflection in the cabinet door. My arms still held tension. My eyes looked tired, but something in my stance had changed. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't shrinking anymore. Outside, the party was winding down. The music softened into something instrumental, unmemorable. The lighting dimmed a little. People started to check their watches, gather their purses. I stepped out for air, letting the breeze brush against my face as I leaned against the porch railing. I noticed Bryce watching me from across the yard. He didn't approach this time. Maybe he'd finally realized that not every silence was an invitation. I pulled out my phone, opened the draft to the property lawyer, and hovered over the button. This time, I didn't hesitate. After sending the message, I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the screen, stood up from the porch railing, and walked inside. Past the folding chairs being stacked, past the catering trays going cold, past my sister's laughter echoing through the speakers like nothing had happened. But something had. I had changed, and they hadn't noticed yet. I made my way upstairs. The hallway to my childhood bedroom still creaked the same way it did when I was 13, sneaking back from midnight kitchen raids. I hadn't stepped into that room since the day Dad's things were boxed up. When I opened the door, the scent hit me first. Old cedar, dried lavender, and the faint smell of printer ink. The walls hadn't changed. The posters were gone, but the outlines where they once hung were still faintly visible. The desk in the corner still held a chipped corner I'd covered with a sticker that read, "Let her speak." I crossed the room and pulled open the bottom drawer. The envelope was there, exactly where he'd left it. "Callista, open this if you ever feel like you've been erased." His handwriting was unmistakable, strong, slanted slightly to the left. I sat down on the edge of the bed and tore the flap open. Inside was a letter and a notarized property transfer. It was dated a few months before Dad died. Everything was official, documented, clear. The Oak Ridge house was mine. Signed over not because I asked, but because he saw something no one else had cared to see. I know you won't ask for it, the letter read, but you've carried this family without credit. You deserve something that's yours. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I folded the letter, slipped it into my purse beside the deed, and stood up straighter than I had in years. I wasn't hiding this time, not from them, not from myself. Downstairs, the party had picked up again. Marlene's voice filtered through the air like bad perfume. Loud, lingering, and hard to ignore. I took the long route back to the patio, walking past the side garden, behind the shrubs where the projection equipment was set up for the big finale. The DJ's voice came over the speakers. "All right, folks, we've got a special video tribute for the birthday girl. Sit tight, this one's a tearjerker." Guests gathered near the screen. Marlene sat in the front row, hands folded delicately in her lap, like she was about to accept an award. I stayed behind, near the hedge, out of view. The screen flickered. Instead of the polished tribute her assistant had curated, another video began to play. I knew it well. I'd received it anonymously weeks ago. No subject line, just a link. A friend of Marlene's, maybe former friend now, had sent it. It had been filmed on a phone, audio grainy but clear. Marlene's voice filled the air. "I don't need Callista to be seen. She's just background, you know? Some people were made to be the help." Gasps, real, audible ones. She appeared on screen, pacing in her dressing room, still in her robe, hair half done. Honestly, if she disappeared tomorrow, nobody would even notice. Especially not Mom. Silence. As if someone had sucked all the air out of the garden. I stepped forward, just enough to be visible. Marlene turned, her face pale under the patio lights. For once, she didn't have a comeback ready. "That was taken out of context," she stammered. I tilted my head, keeping my voice steady. "Out of context? Should I play the rest?" She stared at me like I had betrayed her. That was the irony of it. She truly believed she was the one betrayed. "You think you're better than me now?" she snapped. "No," I said calmly. "I've always been better than the version of me you told people about." The crowd didn't move. Some shifted awkwardly. One of the aunts who never liked me nodded slowly, like she'd just realized she'd been clapping for the wrong daughter all this time. Marlene stood up, smoothing her dress like it could help her recover control. "You're trying to humiliate me. That's what this is." "I'm not trying," I replied. "You did that yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it." She blinked. A second later, she stormed off the patio, heels clacking down the steps and out of sight. No one followed her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I walked over to the table where the projector stood and picked up my bag. Then, with one final glance toward the house I'd been written out of too many times, I texted Avery. "Tomorrow. 10 a.m. Let's move forward." The message delivered. Then marked read. Grant was still in the doorway when I sent the message. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. His eyes followed me as I stepped past him and walked back toward the yard, where the guests were lingering, unsure of what to do with themselves now that Marlene had vanished, and the party's perfect surface had cracked in front of them. Some tried to act casual, hovering near the dessert table or refilling their drinks, but most just kept glancing toward me, waiting, maybe, to see what I'd do next. I didn't make them wait long. Marlene's voice came from the far end of the yard, too loud, too cheerful. "All right, folks, time for cake. Let's not let one little hiccup ruin the mood." I walked to the center of the patio, right where she'd stood earlier to give her toast. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "This party is over," I said, calm, steady, unapologetic. "And I suggest you all leave, unless you've come to thank the actual host." It took a second for the meaning to register. A murmur rippled through the guests. A woman near the drink station whispered, "Wait, this is her house?" Someone else responded, "Are you serious? I thought it was Marlene's." I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. I stood with my arms crossed as the silence grew thick. Marlene froze mid-sentence, cupcake in hand, halfway toward her daughter. Her mouth tightened. "She's being dramatic. Don't mind her." But it was already too late. Guests began gathering their bags, saying awkward goodbyes. Some didn't even make eye contact. Within minutes, the once-packed yard had emptied into quiet rustles of footsteps, muted car engines, and the occasional nervous laugh as people retreated. I didn't enjoy it, but I did feel relief. Back inside, I walked past the photo wall and into the guest room, where I'd set up the backup projection system earlier in the day. I plugged in the second flash drive. The file loaded quickly. On screen appeared Marlene, caught by a phone camera in her prep room the day before the party. She held the clay sculpture I'd made for the centerpiece, delicate, hand-painted with floral patterns from our grandmother's old china. "She's not getting credit for this," Marlene muttered in the video, adjusting her robe and glancing toward the mirror. "It's my moment." And then, without hesitation, she let it fall. The crash of ceramic echoed in the clip, followed by her laugh, sharp, proud, like she'd just won a game no one else knew they were playing. I let the footage play, even though the room was empty. I wasn't doing it for witnesses anymore. I was doing it because I needed to see it again. To remind myself this wasn't in my head. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't creating drama. I turned off the projector and shut down the system. Then I walked to the kitchen. Grant sat at the island, shoulders slightly hunched, a glass of untouched water in front of him. He didn't look up as I approached, but he didn't move away either. I placed the manila folder on the counter between us. "This is a mortgage agreement," I said. $180,000. Taken out using my name, signed with a forgery. He looked up then, his expression slow to shift, from confusion to understanding to disbelief. "I stayed quiet about this," I continued, "because I didn't want to make things worse, because I thought, maybe, if I just kept doing the right thing, they'd eventually see it." He nodded once, barely perceptible. "But they didn't," I said, "and now there will be consequences." Behind us, footsteps. Marlene re-entered the kitchen, arms folded, face already twisted in preemptive denial. "You're bluffing," she snapped. "There's no way I could have." I turned toward her. "Then sue me." It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely stunned. Not offended, not defensive, just quiet. She glanced toward Grant, but he didn't meet her eyes. "I didn't do anything illegal," she said, but her voice was weaker now, uncertain. "We're family. Families borrow. That's what people do." I opened my bag again, pulled out one more folder, and handed it to Grant. "If you care about your daughter, you'll want to know exactly what her mother's willing to risk behind closed doors." He took it. His hands shook. Marlene stared at me, her jaw tight. "This is about revenge." "No," I said. "This is about truth. You can lie to everyone else. But I'm done lying to myself." For a long moment, none of us moved. The kitchen, once filled with the aroma of catered food and quiet judgments, now felt colder, honest. I turned and walked away, not waiting for her to answer. The house felt different the next morning, quieter, more hollow, like the echoes inside it were finally catching up to the years of things left unsaid. I parked down the block, walked up the front steps with my hair still wet from the shower and no makeup on. I wasn't there to impress anyone. Avery's office sat in a brick building just off Main Street. No gold-plated signs, no unnecessary posturing, just clean lines, firm handshakes, and facts. She was waiting for me inside, seated behind her desk, her sleeves rolled up, and a legal pad already halfway full. She didn't ask me how I was. I appreciated that. She slid a folder across the table. We verified the documents. The signature was lifted from an old tax form, matched against your past filings. The loan was filed using that forgery. I didn't blink. "So it's clear?" As daylight, she said. This isn't just a moral failure. It's fraud, state and federal. My fingers tapped the edge of the folder once, then stilled. If this goes to court, she added, she's not just looking at a lost house. Depending on how she responds to discovery, it could escalate. I met her eyes. I don't want a circus. Avery nodded. Then we move quickly. Filing begins today. Outside her office, I stood on the sidewalk and let the sun warm my shoulders. The breeze had a bite to it. Fall was coming. I checked my phone. No new messages from Marlene. Not that I expected one. That evening, I returned to the house, not to argue, not to fight, but to gather the rest of my things. I'd left behind boxes of files, a few personal belongings, and my father's old journals. When I stepped inside, the place looked untouched, staged, a home where nothing had ever been wrong. But sitting in the front room was Dr. Lucien Baer. His cane rested against his knee, and a cup of tea steamed on the side table. Edwina sat across from him, her hands folded tightly like she was praying he'd fix something. "Callista," Lucien said, standing with effort. "I heard what happened. I came because, well, some things need to be said out loud." I nodded slowly, unsure of what he meant. Edwina barely looked at me. "He doesn't need to get involved." "She's still your daughter," Lucien said to her, then turned to me. "I've watched this family from a distance for years. Sat at your holiday tables, donated to your fundraisers, showed up to birthday parties with gifts I picked carefully for people who barely looked up." He took a slow sip of tea before continuing. "But I never once saw you, Callista, treated as though you belonged." I didn't say anything. I let the weight of his words land in the room. "You raised this household. You kept the roof standing, literally and figuratively, and all you got in return was silence. The silence between your mother's praises for Marlene. The silence in family photos where your seat was always just out of frame." Edwina shifted, the tightness in her face trembling for a second. "You don't know the full story." "I know enough," he said gently, "and so does she." I looked at my mother. She stared at the floor. Lucien touched my arm. "If you choose to fight, do it with the knowledge that your life has always mattered, even if this house never told you that." I nodded once, throat tight. Later that night, after Lucien had gone, a courier arrived with a cream envelope and a familiar return address. Avery Quist. Grant answered the door, took the delivery, and read the front before handing it to Marlene. "What's this?" she asked, already annoyed. "Summons," he said. She tore it open, skimmed the first paragraph, then the second. Her breath hitched. "This is insane. She's suing me?" "She's pressing for civil penalties and asset recovery," he said evenly. "You forged her name." Her hands shook. "I didn't forge anything. I mean, look, it was just paperwork. It wasn't like I stole from a stranger." "That's exactly what makes it worse," Grant replied. "You stole from your sister." Marlene's voice cracked. "I gave her something to do. I gave her a life. What was she going to be without me? Some sad, dusty sidekick with a Pinterest board and no audience?" He didn't respond. In the hallway, their daughter Sienna peeked from behind the door. Her eyes wide, her mouth tight. She'd heard enough to know something was unraveling. Marlene saw her, and for a second, her defiance wavered. She looked in the mirror hanging beside the coat rack and paused, just long enough to register what was staring back at her. Not a victim, not a star. Just a woman who'd finally lost the script. The next morning, I checked my email. There it was. Avery's message. Her team offered mediation. They want to avoid public filings. I replied instantly. Only if she admits it. In writing, in public. Then I closed the laptop and sat back. Because some truths don't need revenge. They just need light. The email was sent. No hesitation this time, no shaky fingers. I closed the laptop and set it aside, knowing exactly what that message meant. Avery would move swiftly, and Marlene's team, if they had any common sense, would stop pretending this was a misunderstanding and start treating it like the legal crisis it was. A few hours later, the sky was shifting into dusk. I stood at the kitchen sink in my own apartment, rinsing a mug that had once belonged to Dad. On the rim, a tiny chip where he used to rest his thumb. I hadn't noticed it until the day we packed his things. Funny what you start seeing when people stop talking. My phone buzzed. I dried my hands and picked it up. Avery. They're asking for mediation. Press wants a statement. We move when you're ready. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stepped onto my small balcony and watched a few teenagers play basketball in the park across the street. One kid missed a shot and laughed at himself. No drama, no scene. Just an honest moment of being human. Back inside, I typed out a reply. Only if she admits it. In writing, in public. Then I sent it. The next morning, I was scheduled for a video call with Avery and a few members of Marlene's legal team. But first, I had something else to do. The community center downtown wasn't glamorous. Beige walls, flickering overhead lights, chairs that creaked when you shifted your weight. But it held something far more valuable: accountability. I arrived just before 9. The place was mostly empty, save for a few early risers and a receptionist sipping coffee from a World's Okayest employee mug. I gave her my name, and she waved me toward room 3. Inside, a panel had been set up. 3 mediators, neutral but attentive, and one small video screen where Marlene would join remotely. She hadn't dared to show up in person. Avery was already there, seated beside me, folders neatly stacked, posture unflinching. I sat straighter just because she did. The screen came to life. Marlene's face appeared. Hair pulled back too tightly, makeup layered just enough to look natural. She wore white. Of course she did. I almost laughed. Ms. Dorr, one of the mediators began, we're here to facilitate a resolution between you and Ms. Ray. Let's begin with your statement. Marlene cleared her throat. First of all, I never intended for things to get this far. This was a family matter, private, and I don't think legal action was ever necessary. Avery leaned forward. The forgery was necessary? Marlene flushed. It wasn't forgery. It was expediency. Callista wasn't using the house. She said, I never said that, I interrupted. Calm, clear. And if this isn't a real apology, we're done. There was a long pause. The mediator looked toward Marlene. Ms. Dorr, would you like to revise your statement? Marlene's jaw twitched. I, Marlene Dorr, she began reluctantly, acknowledge that I used my sister's name without consent to secure a mortgage loan. I misrepresented her involvement, and in doing so, I overstepped both legal and ethical boundaries. It wasn't warm, it wasn't heartfelt, but it was public, it was recorded. I didn't need more. The mediators moved to the settlement terms. I signed my end, then closed the file. It was done. As Avery and I walked out, she looked at me. How do you feel? Like I just turned off a noise that's been running in the background for 15 years. That night, I returned to the house one last time. Not for confrontation, just closure. I parked in front, knocked, and waited. It was Grant who answered. She's not here, he said. I'm not here for her. He opened the door and let me in. The place felt smaller than I remembered, quieter. I walked past the living room, past the hallway full of photos I wasn't in, and into the back office, once Dad's, now mostly empty. On the desk was a shoebox labeled for Callista, in Grant's handwriting. Inside were old receipts, a flash drive, and a note. I should have spoken up sooner, but I see you now, and so does Sienna. I folded the note and tucked it into my purse. As I was about to leave, Sienna came down the stairs, holding a school project. Is it true? She asked. I looked at her, that same hesitation in her eyes I'd seen in the mirror for years. It's true, I said gently, but it's over now. She nodded slowly, then hugged me without another word. The moment I stepped outside, the wind picked up, sending dried leaves skittering across the porch. I stood there for a minute. Then I opened my phone, navigated to the Department of State licensing website, and resumed the application I'd left unfinished a decade ago. The cursor blinked at me. I clicked submit. Because this time, I wasn't building for anyone else. The submission confirmation hit my inbox around 9:07 a.m., just as I was pouring coffee into the same ceramic mug I'd used for years, the one with a small chip on the handle and a fading bluebird near the rim. I didn't smile. Not exactly, but something softened in me, like an old knot loosening in my chest. By noon, the first headlines began to trickle in. Local influencer sued by sister for mortgage fraud. I was erased. Callista Ray speaks out. Sister versus sister, when branding goes too far. I wasn't refreshing news pages. I wasn't scrolling for comments. But I was aware of them. You can feel it when your name becomes public property. Except this time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. By late afternoon, Marlene's PR firm released a statement. It was brief, careful, designed to pacify. Ms. Dorr regrets any misunderstandings and has taken steps to address family matters privately. No apology, no accountability, just damage control. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But then, a friend forwarded me a screenshot. A major sponsor, one of Marlene's biggest, had dropped her. We believe in ethical partnerships. Trust matters. It wasn't revenge. It was consequence. That evening, Avery called. They've settled. Full retraction. Public apology pending. You'll receive the draft before it goes live. I thanked her, then set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me hadn't allowed for this outcome. Somewhere between the trauma and the routines I built around it, I stopped imagining justice could be quiet. But it can be. That night, I sat down with a copy of the local print paper, just to hold the ink in my hands. The front page didn't carry the story, but page 7 did. And there it was. A pull quote in bold. I gave her the house. She gave me erasure. Callista Ray. I read it once, then folded the page, not out of pride, but preservation. Sienna had her first school debate that week. I showed up early, sat in the third row, and watched her speak with a poise that made me ache. When she caught sight of me, she didn't smile right away. Instead, she gave me a nod. Subtle, but full of something that felt like understanding. Afterward, in the hallway, she walked beside me in silence until we reached the exit. My teacher asked what inspires me, she said softly. I said you. I didn't know how to answer, so I squeezed her hand. Later that week, I stopped by the old house, not for confrontation, not even for closure, just to see. The windows were dark, the garden overgrown. A for sale sign leaned slightly to one side. I walked up to the porch, paused in front of the door where I used to hang seasonal wreaths, and set down a small package. Inside, a copy of the deed. A note. You once told me I didn't know my place. Turns out I do. It just isn't here. Back at my apartment, I hung a new nameplate outside my studio door. Ray & Co. Creative design. No pretense. No borrowed names. No more giving my voice away. I spent the next few days organizing, setting up consultations, calling old contacts from school who still remembered my senior project. One even said, "It's about time." When the apology from Marlene finally went live, I didn't watch the video. I didn't need to hear her voice tremble through scripted regret. I skimmed the transcript just once. It ended with, "To my sister, I am sorry. I took what wasn't mine, and I let silence do the rest." I closed the tab. The mail arrived that afternoon. Among it, a small envelope from Lucian Bear. No return address, just my name in strong cursive. Inside, a photograph. Me, age 16, crouched near a folding table at a backyard party, adjusting a tablecloth while Marlene posed near a cake. I didn't know anyone had taken it. Tucked behind the photo was a torn scrap of yellowed paper. My father's handwriting, unmistakable. You never needed the spotlight, but that doesn't mean you didn't earn it. I held the photo for a long time, not to mourn it, just to own it. Later that night, I stood on my own porch, tea in hand, cool air brushing past my shoulders. A car slowed at the curb. Marlene's. She didn't get out. She didn't wave. I didn't either. Because some stories don't end with reunion. Some end with someone walking away. Quietly, finally, into something they built for themselves. Hi there. My name's Carolyn, and for 15 years, I mopped the floors at a company my sister claimed to build. She smiled on magazine covers while I cleaned her office at night. She called me just the janitor, said I belonged in the background. But what she didn't know was that I owned the company. The documents were signed. My father's legacy was mine. Still, they erased me, cropped me out of photos, misspelled my name on slideshows, called me a risk behind closed doors. And the worst part? It wasn't just Darlene. It was my own mother saying, "Let her feel useful. It keeps her occupied." So I stayed quiet. Until the day her badge stopped working and mine opened every door. How does someone survive 15 years of silence, then flip the entire boardroom without ever raising her voice? Do you really want to know? I arrived just in time to see the second wine bottle opened. The room smelled like garlic bread and ambition. Everyone talking louder than they needed to. The lights in the banquet hall were too warm, casting a golden hue that made everyone look happier than they really were. I stood at the edge of the carpet, still in my plain gray slacks and navy blouse. My hair was pulled back into the same bun I wore every day. Nobody turned their head, not even my mother. Darlene, in her burgundy blazer and sculpted heels, was already in full performance mode, laughing too loud, patting the shoulder of one of Dad's old colleagues, taking selfies with her wine glass tilted just right. I heard her say, "Well, this is what 20 years of brand management looks like." Her voice echoed. My mother glanced in my direction, but didn't smile, didn't nod, just turned back to the circle she was seated in. Someone muttered, "Oh, you're here," before shifting their chair to face a story about Darlene's new podcast interview. I didn't say anything. I found a seat at the far end, near the staff entrance. The linen on the table hadn't even been pressed. A butter knife rested uneven on a chipped plate. I smoothed the napkin and folded it onto my lap. My hands smelled faintly of bleach. I'd come straight from work. Dinner began. Plates were passed down, dishes filled with chicken marsala and overcooked vegetables. I served myself quietly, nodding at the waiter as he placed a glass of water in front of me. Darlene's laugh cut through the music like it always had. Sharp, knowing, confident. Midway through the main course, someone raised their glass. "To Darlene," they said, "for making the cover of Women to Watch Midwest." Applause erupted. The man seated beside me clapped, then leaned toward me and asked, "You two are sisters, right?" I nodded once. "Oh, wow. You look different." He smiled like it was a compliment. Darlene beamed from her seat, waving her hand playfully. "Let's be real. One of us scrubs floors, the other gets published. Balance, right?" People laughed. Real, full-throated laughter. Someone nearby even whistled. The camera panned across the room. Some intern with a tripod capturing candids for the company blog. The lens swept past me. I didn't smile. I didn't move. I just stared down at the ice cubes in my glass, watching one crack slowly as it melted. Across the table, my mother chuckled. She touched Darlene's arm and whispered something into her ear. They both laughed again, louder this time. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't speak. I'd learned years ago that my silence made them more uncomfortable than my voice ever could. After the dessert plates were cleared, a woman dropped her napkin near my feet. I bent down to pick it up. "You're fast," she said, joking. "Ever think of coming to my place to clean?" More laughter. I smiled without showing teeth and stood back up. I needed air. I walked out into the hallway, passing the mirrored wall next to the coat check. My reflection caught me mid-step. I didn't look tired. I didn't look angry. I just looked hollow, like someone standing in a life that didn't quite fit. Inside the restroom, I locked the stall door and pulled out my phone. I opened the legal folder I kept tucked away in my photo gallery. The first image was a scanned document. Power of attorney, 52% shareholding. My name, notarized, signed by my late father. The next image, my ID card from work. Custodial team, Carolyn M. I stared at those two images for a long time. Side by side, they told the story nobody else would believe if I said it out loud. I whispered, "Not yet." Back at the banquet room, the music had switched to something upbeat. Darlene was twirling her wine glass, still talking, still performing. I stood at the doorway for a moment, then turned around and left. They wouldn't remember I was there, but I would. I didn't go straight home that night. Instead, I took the long way, circling downtown in my beat-up sedan, windows down, letting the cold air sting my face. The music in the background was soft, some old country station barely coming through, but it helped me stay grounded. By the time I got back to my apartment, my hands were stiff from the steering wheel, but my mind had settled. I didn't sleep much, just a few hours, enough to keep me standing. Morning came like it always did, gray and quiet. I packed my lunch, pulled on my work polo, and made the short drive to Northstone headquarters. As I stepped through the side entrance reserved for facilities staff, the smell of floor wax and coffee hit me. Familiar, comforting in a way, but that comfort cracked the second I walked past the lobby. There it was, a 6-foot-wide vinyl print mounted across the main wall. The Cray family legacy, a century of excellence. A photo collage wrapped around the headline. Board members, grandparents, uncles, Darlene in at least 4 different outfits, cousins I hadn't seen in a decade. Even Mom in that powder blue suit she saves for important functions. And then there was the picture. I knew it well. It was from a summer family picnic 5 years ago. I was standing on the left, holding a tray of burgers, smiling. The photo they used was nearly identical, but I wasn't in it. Cropped clean out, like I'd never stood there. It wasn't sloppy. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. The light was balanced, edges softened. No sign of tampering to the average eye, but I knew. I stared for a few moments, my cleaning cart idle behind me. People walked past, offering polite nods or pretending not to see me at all. "Nice job on the floors last night," someone said offhandedly. I couldn't even tell who it was. I nodded, pushed my cart forward, and didn't say a word. Around mid-morning, I was reassigned to prep the media room for an upcoming family appreciation event. A couple of interns buzzed around, fixing lighting and testing audio. Darlene's assistant, Monica, stood in front of the projector, organizing files on her laptop. I swept quietly around the perimeter until Monica left the laptop unattended to answer a call. I leaned in, just enough to see the screen. Slide number 4. Our family support, behind every success. There they were, a slideshow of smiling relatives. Darlene, of course. Mom, again. 3 cousins. Even Uncle Carl, who lives in Arizona. Then there was mine. My name was misspelled, Carlin, instead of Carolyn. And next to it, support staff, facilities. The photo? A blurry shot from an office birthday where I was handing out paper plates. I looked like someone who had stumbled into the frame. Monica returned just as I stepped back. She glanced at me, then at the screen. "Oh, that's just an old draft," she said, waving a hand. "We didn't mean anything by it." She didn't move to fix it. I gave her a small nod, picked up my mop, and stepped out of the room. Back in the janitor's closet, I sat on the overturned bucket for a minute, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera. Click. Slide number 4 was now saved. I knew better than to make a scene. I had seen what happened to people who spoke too soon, especially women like me. Quiet, polite, predictable. Instead, I kept my head down the rest of the shift. I smiled when spoken to, logged my hours, went through the motions. But after lunch, when the building cleared out for the day's off-site event, I slipped into the records room with a vacuum in hand. The custodian access still worked on that door. The room smelled like paper and dust. I moved quickly, scrolling through digital logs and printed press releases. I looked for photos, staff acknowledgments, historical newsletters. I found 22 published company newsletters dating back 5 years. My name appeared in only one, and only because I had been listed as a contact in the emergency response drill. I had been at every company picnic, cleaned every after-hours board meeting, worked through 2 Christmas Eves and 1 New Year's Day. And yet, in these documents, I barely existed. One photo caught my eye, the team photo from the year Darlene won her first PR award. I remembered standing beside Miguel, smiling. He had his arm around my shoulder. But in the final version on file, I wasn't there. Miguel was. The background was identical, but the space I had occupied was filled with a tree. A literal tree. I copied the files onto a USB drive I kept in my sock. On my way out, I wiped the keyboard, erased my access trail, and shut off the lights. Back at my locker, I pulled out a folded notebook labeled Archive Notes. I wrote down the day, time, file name, and folder path. Then I labeled the entry, Image replaced, Photo, Team Award 2018. I didn't feel numb, not anymore. I felt alert. Later that night, after I locked up the janitor's closet and returned home, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the TV. The apartment was silent, except for the gentle hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from the radiator. I made tea, sat on the edge of the bed, still in my work pants, and opened my laptop. I scrolled through old messages, ones I hadn't read in years. Most were one-liners, quick, dismissive replies, a digital trail of things never followed up on. I found the text thread with Darlene from 2 years ago, when I'd asked if she could help me update my profile on the company intranet. Her response had been short. I'm busy. No one cares about janitor bios. No follow-up, no emoji, just silence. I highlighted her message in red and added a small tag next to it. Visibility request denied. I wasn't collecting these things for pity. I was tracking a pattern, not just in Darlene, but in the way the whole system around her operated. Some people got platforms, others got cut out. By the weekend, I thought I had gotten used to the feeling. The ache that settles when you've been overlooked too many times to count. But it hit me all over again at Sunday lunch. The invitation had come through a group text. Darlene had insisted on a family meal to celebrate our shared legacy. I knew better than to expect sincerity. Still, I showed up, wearing a sweater that I hoped didn't smell like bleach and slacks, without too many visible creases. Mom's house looked the same. Modest, neat, front porch, potted with begonias she replaced every few months. Inside, the air smelled like pot roast and starch. Darlene was already there, of course, standing by the fireplace with her personal photographer. A man in a slim-cut shirt, snapping away as she posed next to framed family photos she'd probably curated just for the shoot. "Oh, Carolyn," she said when she saw me, as if I were unexpected. "Do me a favor and hold the baby? Rachel needs a hand with her curls, and we're almost done." Before I could say anything, someone passed me my cousin's infant, and I found myself standing in the corner, cradling a child while everyone else huddled in front of the camera, arms around each other. I wasn't in a single shot. During the meal, I sat at the far end of the table, right between a bowl of peas and the stack of napkins. Conversation swirled around Darlene's latest feature in some women's entrepreneur magazine. Someone brought up her recent panel talk in Chicago. She batted her lashes and brushed it off, but not really. At one point, she turned to Mom and said, "I told the editor our strength came from how we were raised, that we were taught to lead by example." Mom smiled and said, "That's right, you always had the spark." Then, as if on cue, she turned to me and added, "And you've always been quiet, which is your gift. Not everyone needs to be loud to matter. Let Darlene speak, she was born for it." I set my fork down slowly, Not slamming it, but enough to hear the metal touch porcelain. I looked at her. Really looked. Not just at her face, but at the way she tilted her chin toward Darlene, proud, leaning in. And I realized that this wasn't just about Darlene stealing the spotlight. It was about the way everyone else kept handing it to her without question. The next hour passed with me passing dishes, refilling water glasses, and helping clear plates. I didn't say much. Nobody seemed to notice. After dessert, I offered to do the dishes. It wasn't habit. It was survival. I needed something to keep my hands moving. In the kitchen, with my arms deep in soapy water, I could hear them in the next room. Mom and Darlene, voices lowered, but not enough. "She seems content enough," Mom said. "Let her feel useful, it keeps her occupied." I gripped a glass a little tighter than necessary, then eased off before it cracked. "She's never wanted more," Darlene replied. "Some people are just meant to stay in the background." I rinsed the plate I was holding and placed it carefully into the drying rack. Then I washed another. Then another. My breath came in evenly. Too evenly. When I finished, I wiped my hands, hung the towel back where it belonged, and walked out without a word. Nobody noticed I'd left the room. That night, back in my apartment, I pulled out my notebook. Under the previous entries, I wrote a new line. Verbal minimization. 2 witnesses. Internal narrative framed by others. Reinforced perception. Background role, Siu, comfort zone. I looked at those words for a long moment. Then I flipped the page and wrote something else. Something simple. They don't ask why I stay quiet. Because they need me to be. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the lamp. I wasn't silent because I was weak. I was silent because they never listened anyway. The next morning, I got up before the sun. The apartment was still dark, and the city hadn't quite come alive yet. I moved through my routine in silence. Coffee, hair pulled back, uniform shirt buttoned halfway, before I remembered to tuck it in. There was something about early mornings like that. A calm before the current picked up and reminded me I wasn't swimming. I was surviving. The air outside had a bite to it, even in spring. By the time I pulled into the North Stone lot, there were already 2 catering vans and a pop-up tent being erected out front. Another one of Darlene's brand days, from the looks of it. Probably something with local press, fake smiles, and quotes about legacy and community values. I clocked in through the staff entrance, swiped my ID badge, and started prepping the mop cart. But as I wheeled it toward the lobby, the security guard stepped into my path. "Sorry," he said, one hand up. "They're filming in the front hall today, closed to non-essential personnel until noon." I held up my ID. "Custodial," I said. "I know," he replied, lowering his voice. "It's not me, it's her team. They submitted a restricted list. You're not on it." Over his shoulder, I could see them. Darlene, in a cream suit this time, standing under the Northstone logo, shoulder to shoulder with board members, smiling like it didn't take effort. She laughed, tilted her chin to the left, moved her hand to the right, every gesture intentional, camera ready. My mop bucket sat behind me, water still warm. I didn't move, not yet. "Look," the guard added, awkward now. "If you want, I can page someone from ops." "No need," I said. I stepped back, wheeled the cart in the opposite direction, and didn't look at her again. Not in that moment. By noon, I had cleaned 3 levels of break rooms and replaced 10 soap dispensers. I was restocking the paper towels in the basement lounge when the door creaked open. It was Miguel's daughter, Jada. She came every so often when her school was out, quiet, sharp-eyed, with a sketchbook always tucked under her arm. "Hey, Miss Carolyn," she said, plopping down near the vending machine. I smiled. "Hey, Peanut. Your dad upstairs?" She nodded. "He's doing the boardroom. He said to wait here and not touch anything sharp." I chuckled and handed her a juice box from the fridge. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she tilted her head toward me and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do the men in suits always stop talking when you walk by? And why do they all call you ma'am if your badge says custodian? I blinked. Kids don't play the politics adults do. They see what's there and what isn't. I crouched beside her, rested my forearms on my knees, and looked her in the eyes. Sometimes, I said slowly, you don't need a loud title to make people notice you. You just have to stay long enough for the truth to show up. She nodded like she understood, then took a sip of her juice. Later that evening, after the building had cleared out and most of the lights were dimmed, I walked the empty halls, not for work this time, but for something else. I still wore my uniform, still pushed a cart, but I wasn't cleaning. I walked past the media suite and paused at the door. Inside, Darlene was rehearsing a group of interns for an upcoming internal promo video. She was instructing them how to pose, where to place their hands, when to nod. One of the interns, a tall girl with braids and a nervous smile, raised her hand. Should we include Ms. Carolyn in the profile series? She's got the longest record here, right? Darlene didn't miss a beat. We're focusing on visible faces. Public familiarity helps with brand alignment. Carolyn's not really on message. Not on message. I reached into my pocket, tapped the voice memo button on my phone, and let it run for 30 seconds. Then I stopped it, saved the file, and time-stamped it. Back at my locker, I pulled out the folder. The one with the original paperwork, the sealed copy of Dad's share transfer, my amended name change, everything in order. I didn't open it, not yet, but I placed it gently on the top shelf, facing out. They weren't just pretending I wasn't part of the story. They were rewriting the whole damn thing like I'd never existed at all. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw cropped photos, fading names, and a long line of moments where I had bitten my tongue for the sake of keeping the peace. Sunday night, after I cleaned out the top shelf of my hallway closet, I finally found it. The fireproof lockbox I hadn't touched in over a decade. I placed it on the kitchen table, still dusty from where it had been shoved behind old blankets. It took me 2 tries to get the combination right. When the latch popped, something in my chest shifted. The smell of old paper hit me first, faintly metallic and dry. Inside, everything was still there. The certified copy of my name change, dated 6 months after my father died. The state seal pressed deep into the page like it hadn't aged a day. I remembered the conversation with Darlene when I told her I'd filed for it. She had rolled her eyes over the rim of her coffee mug and said, "Seriously? Who changes their name just because they got a few shares?" I just stood there, holding the envelope. I didn't reply. Not then. Nobody had asked about it again, not even Mom. I hadn't changed it for show. I did it because the shares were transferred in my full legal name, Carolyn Elise Marceau. And for the first time, I wanted to make sure my name lined up with something that couldn't be erased, blurred, or cropped out. Back in the present, I laid the certificate on the table and smoothed it flat with both hands. The same name that no one bothered to pronounce correctly at work was written here in bold black ink, attached to legal weight they had all chosen to ignore. But I hadn't ignored it. Beneath the certificate was another envelope, this one heavier, thicker, yellowed slightly around the edges. I opened it carefully. Inside was the original document my father had signed, transferring 52% of the company shares to me. Not Darlene, not our cousins, not Mom, just me. It was signed in ink, dated, notarized, and witnessed, legally binding, and for 15 years, I had done nothing with it. I had kept it in this box like a secret, waiting, watching, filing away the moments when someone laughed too loud at my expense or erased my name from yet another list. Because power doesn't always come from speaking first. Sometimes it comes from being the only one who remembers everything. That evening, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I created a new file and titled it, Voting Control Active. I attached scans of both documents and saved them twice. One copy on the desktop, one on an external hard drive I kept in the back of the pantry behind the old cereal boxes. Then I printed 3 hard copies and tucked them into a fresh folder. I labeled it plainly, Legal authority, internal use. When I closed the lid of my laptop, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. I didn't need applause. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. Monday morning arrived with the same gray clouds stretched low over the skyline. Traffic was light, and the usual static buzz of the local news played low on my car radio. Nothing had changed, not on the surface. But I had. I wore my usual uniform, blue coveralls, name tag still attached. But this time, I carried a manila envelope under my arm instead of a mop handle. When I entered the building, I didn't head to the custodial closet. I walked straight to the elevator. The receptionist looked up from her desk as I passed but didn't stop me. I didn't offer a smile. I didn't need permission. In the hallway near the executive wing, I stopped by my locker. Old, scratched, paint chipping off the edges. I opened it slowly and slipped the envelope onto the top shelf. On the outside, I had written, "In case of legal denial, deliver to legal counsel, Tom Halberd." Tom had been my father's attorney, still on retainer, still loyal to his signature. With that done, I walked to the lobby. The large glass display was still up, still gleaming in the morning light. The photo collage hadn't changed. I was still missing. But I didn't feel small this time. I stood there for a few minutes, watching Darlene's smiling face framed in gold, surrounded by words like visionary, pioneer, and legacy. And I smiled back, quietly. It wouldn't be there much longer. I didn't head home after my shift. I stayed behind. It wasn't unusual. Cleaners often worked odd hours. The night crew sometimes needed coverage, and nobody questioned me if I stayed late with a mop in hand. But this time, I wasn't there for scuff marks or spilled coffee. Around 7:45 p.m., after the last group of middle managers had cleared out, I made my way to the basement level. The server access room was located just past the old copy center, down a hallway no one ever seemed to bother locking. The keypad beeped once, then opened. I'd used this route before, plenty of times. Nobody had ever stopped me. Why would they? Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, cool air buzzing from the vents to keep the servers running efficiently. My ID badge granted me enough access to clean the network room, but I didn't bring a mop tonight. I brought a USB stick and a reason. I approached the terminal in the far corner, the one not logged out properly. Most people assumed no one down here had the know-how to do more than vacuum. They were wrong. I typed in a user search, darlene.knorthstonegroup.com. Thousands of emails. I narrowed the filter, internal PR threads, HR coordination, outgoing reports to the board. Then I set the date range. I wasn't looking for broad strokes. I wanted the last 12 months, the cover-up phase, the peak of her campaign. A folder titled Legacy Content, Final Edits, caught my eye. Inside were notes marked, remove staff names from image credits, adjust quote attribution, CM to DK, and one labeled simply, quiet ones don't sell. That one stung more than I expected. I downloaded everything, flagged the auto-delete scripts still active on 3 folders. She'd tried to erase the audit trails, but the logs were recoverable. People forget that even deleted data leaves fingerprints. It took 15 minutes. I encrypted the file, backed it up to a second drive, and shut the terminal down. When I left, I flicked the lights off like nothing had happened. The next morning, I arrived early, before the front office buzz began, before Darlene's voice took over the floor. I sat in the break room, logged into the employee portal, and went to the legacy team page. My name was gone. Not just hidden, removed. I clicked View Cached Page in the browser. An earlier version popped up, just 5 days old. My name, still listed under Operational Founders, sat right there. Carol Marceau, Facilities Oversight. I took a screenshot, then another. I checked my HR profile. It now said, Custodial External Support, not eligible for equity incentives. That last part stopped me cold. Equity incentive status doesn't apply to me. I didn't earn my shares through employment. I inherited them. Darlene knew that, but someone had manually edited my designation anyway. Tampering. I pulled the folder from my locker, the one I'd prepped and labeled over the weekend, and opened it on the small table. Inside were the notarized documents, the share transfer, and the original legal copy of my name change. The data I had downloaded last night was already printed, organized, color-coded by timestamp. Then I compiled one new cover sheet. Subject: Tampering, fraud, obstruction of founding rights. Under that, I included a one-line summary. As the majority shareholder, I am submitting formal notice of review. I slipped everything into a fresh envelope, labeled it Board Copy, Confidential. At 10:17 a.m., I left the break room and walked up to the executive floor. The hallway was quiet. Most of the board members were at a quarterly breakfast meeting off-site. Only the assistant board secretary was in her office, sorting through minutes and receipts. She looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" "This is time-sensitive," I said, setting the envelope on the edge of her desk. She glanced at the label. Her face shifted, surprised, then unreadable. "I'll make sure the board gets it." "Thank you," I replied, and left without saying another word. I didn't need a scene. I didn't need applause. What I needed was already in motion. Later that afternoon, I walked past the front lobby again. The display was still up, unchanged. My photo still missing. Darlene's quote still at the center. "We are built on boldness." I looked at the reflection of my face in the glass. Not faded, not soft, just present. They thought if they deleted me from the files, the folders, the wall, maybe I'd vanish. They were wrong. Some ghosts don't stay buried. After I left the secretary's office that morning, I didn't return to the break room. I didn't go back to the service elevator either. I walked out the side door, got into my car, and drove 2 blocks away to a quiet parking lot behind a coffee shop. From there, I opened my tablet, logged into the internal company stream, and waited. That day was the company's Women Who Lead event, an internal live stream meant to showcase female leadership at Northstone. They called it empowerment. I called it branding. Darlene was the final speaker. She always was. The closing act, the polished voice, the face they chose when they wanted to appear progressive but safe. She walked on stage in a navy blazer that matched the company colors, microphone clipped to her collar, smile easy. She sat down across from the PR manager and crossed her legs slowly, the way she always did when she wanted attention but pretended she didn't. They talked about legacy, about company values, about hard work and vision. Then came the last question. "Has your family been a source of inspiration in your career?" She paused, just for effect, then smiled. "Well," she said, letting the audience chuckle before she even delivered the punchline, "my sister's always been behind me. I mean that literally. She's one of the janitors." The crowd laughed, full, sharp, unfiltered. She didn't say my name. She didn't need to. I tapped the record button. The stream was being archived anyway, required for HR compliance. But I wasn't taking any chances. Her words were clear. On camera, public. When the camera cut back to the moderator, Darlene turned to the side, speaking off mic but still audible. "People like her are good for background shots, silent support." I hit stop, saved the file, filed it with the others. That afternoon, around 2 ways, I returned to my desk in the operations wing. As I was sorting through invoices, an auto-transcription email popped up in my inbox. Internal voicemail. The message was short, sent from Darlene's private extension. Her voice was clipped, irritated. "Just make sure she doesn't get in the door tomorrow. Tell security she's a compliance risk. And whatever she handed to the board, burn it." She hung up. The system had routed it to my desk by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. I read the transcript twice before forwarding it to IT and legal. I didn't include commentary, just one line. "This reached me in error. Forwarding in case needed." No drama, no added emotion. Mic drop, clean and dry. The next morning, I woke early. Didn't feel nerves. Just calm. I arrived at Northstone just after 7:30. The parking lot was already half full. Banners had been placed outside the main entrance, announcing a new branding campaign. Northstone, built from within. A photographer was setting up near the lobby. Press badges hung around the necks of two local journalists. And there was Darlene, in a fitted red blazer, flanked by two members of her team. She looked confident, in control, until she reached the security gate. She raised her badge and swiped. Nothing. She swiped again. Red light. One of the security guards stepped forward, quiet but firm. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me." Her smile faltered. She looked at her team, then the cameras, then back to the guard. "There must be a mistake," she said. "Try again." He shook his head. "Your access is under administrative review." "What?" she snapped. "Who authorized that?" Behind her, a few employees had stopped walking. The hallway quieted. And then I walked in. Clipboard in hand, dressed in my regular coveralls, hair pulled back the same as always. She saw me. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, she didn't have a line prepared. I nodded politely, didn't break stride, and continued past her toward the elevators. My badge beeped. Green light, access granted. I didn't need to look back. Her badge didn't work. But mine finally did. I stepped off the elevator just as the conference room doors were being closed. The quarterly shareholder meeting had already begun. I didn't rush. I walked the length of the hallway at a steady pace, clipboard in one hand, black folder under the other arm. I passed familiar faces, people who'd walked by me in break rooms for years without ever learning my name. They watched me now, not because I was loud, not because I announced myself, but because I didn't flinch. Darlene's seat was empty. Of course it was. The boardroom felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe I was just more aware of everything. Who sat where, who looked up when I entered, who avoided eye contact. I didn't wear a power suit. I wore what I always did. Navy blue coveralls with my name stitched just above the chest pocket. Carolyn. Someone cleared their throat as I reached the head of the table. I set the black folder down, looked each of them in the eye. "Before we begin," I said, "I'd like to introduce myself." No one spoke. "I'm Carolyn Marceau," I continued, calm, even, "and I own 52% of Northstone Group." A hush settled over the room like a dropped curtain. I opened the folder, removed the documents, and began passing them out one by one. Not rushing, not pausing. Inside, a notarized share transfer from my father, screenshots of Darlene's internal edits, copies of deleted employee acknowledgments, a printed email chain with timestamps, HR actions, data logs, the voice recording from the stream. The voicemail transcript Darlene never knew reached me. The only sound was the shuffle of paper. One of the board members, Cynthia, I think, finally spoke. Is this all verified?" I nodded. "It's all signed, dated, and backed up. Legal counsel has a sealed copy." A man near the end of the table let out a breath, leaned back in his chair. Someone whispered, "Is this a joke?" I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This," I said, placing it gently in front of the assistant chair, "is footage of Darlene publicly mocking Northstone employees during a live stream. It also includes an off-camera segment where she outlines a strategy to suppress internal recognition in favor of self-promotion. It was submitted for HR compliance archival. I'm simply returning it to the appropriate audience." The assistant turned to a junior staffer. "Put it up." Moments later, the screen at the end of the room flickered to life. Darlene appeared, smiling in high definition. Her voice played clearly. The words were unmistakable. "She's just a janitor." Background support, not brand forward. And then the punchline. That awful, too-perfect smirk when she said, "Balance, right?" No one laughed now. The room didn't erupt. It shifted. Slowly. As if the collective weight of everything unspoken had landed on the table in front of them. One of the older members turned toward me. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" I smiled faintly. "I did. You just didn't see me." Silence again. And then, softly, from the legal counsel seated along the back wall, "Ms. Marceau's majority holding entitles her to call a vote at any time. Her authority is valid." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pound my fist. I moved a motion forward. "To reinstate all previously removed employee recognition entries," I said. "To launch an internal ethics audit, and to restructure the leadership pipeline with new accountability guidelines." Nobody argued. No one called for clarification. The board passed the motion, unanimously. I didn't linger. I gathered the leftover copies into my folder and turned toward the exit. As I reached the hallway, I saw Miguel leaning against the wall just outside. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just gave me a quiet nod. I nodded back. In my hand was a photo, the one Darlene had cropped me out of, years ago. I had restored it digitally, printed it, framed it myself. The original background, the full team, no missing faces. I walked back to the boardroom door, found an open spot on the hallway wall just to the right of the corporate plaque, and hung it there. Carefully, deliberately. No announcement, no caption, just presence. I didn't walk in to take revenge. I walked in so they'd stop pretending I was never there. The next morning, the air felt different. I stepped into my office and paused just inside the doorway. The brass nameplate had been updated. It didn't shout. It wasn't gilded in gold or mounted on marble, but it was there. Etched clean, clear. Carolyn Marceau, chairwoman and majority owner. I sat down at the desk, the same one that once belonged to my father. It still had a slight wobble on the left leg and a scratch on the surface where he used to drum his pen. I never had it fixed. There was something honest in leaving it as it was. My phone buzzed, then again, and again. Email notifications, mentions, press inquiries. Some were from people I hadn't heard from in years. Reporters, ex-colleagues, even a local podcast host who once said I was too internal-facing to be story-worthy. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I clicked on the inbox from Miguel. Just one message, no subject, no pleasantries, just an attachment. I downloaded the image, an old team photo from a decade ago. The one Darlene had once claimed was lost due to quality control. In it, we were all there. Janitorial, admin, maintenance, smiling, tired, real. I hit reply, typed one word. Frame. Then I stood, stretched my back, and walked the photo down to facilities. I handed it directly to Miguel and said, "Put it where everyone walks past, eye level." He nodded, took it from my hands gently, like something sacred. I didn't go back to my desk right away. Instead, I took the long route through the East Wing, the one lined with portraits of Northstone's founding members. Men in dark suits, all captured mid-gesture or mid-laugh, as if the camera had caught them in the act of being important. At the end of the hallway, I stopped and looked at the last frame, a black canvas with nothing inside. "Reserved for next generation legacy," the plaque said. I didn't need my photo there. It wasn't the wall that mattered anymore. Later that afternoon, I sat in my office, holding the framed picture I'd hung outside the boardroom the day before. The restored photo. Me. Full frame. No edits. I heard my office phone ring, but let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I checked it. It was from my mother. "I don't understand all this," she said. "I really don't. I just hope you're not doing this out of spite. Darlene's going through a lot. I don't know what you're trying to prove anymore." I didn't call her back. I didn't scream or cry or even sigh. I whispered to myself as I placed the photo gently on the shelf above the window. I'm doing it because I should have never had to disappear just to be tolerated. Outside, the sun had dropped just low enough to cast long shadows across the floor. The building had started to quiet, but I didn't feel rushed. I had one more place to be. I drove out to the cemetery just after 5. It was quiet the way I remembered it. The wind shifted the branches just enough to make them creak. I parked near the far end, where the path forked toward the veterans section. My father's grave was simple, a small marker, clean, no extra quotes, just a name and 2 dates. I crouched beside it, pulled the velvet cloth from my bag, and placed the sealed company seal beside the headstone, the one he'd given me years ago. I had kept it hidden all this time, quiet, protected, untouched. I kept my promise, I said softly. I stayed until they saw it for themselves. I didn't need him to say anything back. I stayed for a few minutes longer, watching the light change, letting the silence hold space for what I never got to say while he was alive. Then, before leaving, I checked my phone one last time. One new message, from Jada. It read, "You're the first woman I've seen lead without yelling. I want to be like you." I read it 3 times. Each time, it hit a little deeper. I closed the message, turned off the phone, and slid it into my coat pocket. Then, I walked back to my car. Slowly, coat pulled tight against the wind. The sky had turned a soft gray, the kind that didn't feel heavy, just honest. I wasn't rewritten into the story. I rewrote where the story begins.